My guest today keeps the performing arts alive in Queens. Thom, how did you go into the performing arts?
First of all, thank you so much for having me here. It's a pleasure. And we're big fans of Queens Public Television. Yeah, through my school, through my church, often did skits or drama clubs. But it really wasn't until much later in life I had a coworker who was very involved in independent theater and on a dare had me go with him to an audition and was in my first show. And that was about 15, 16 years ago, I guess. And I've been obsessed ever since.
What did you feel in that audition? Like, did your intuition or something told you, okay, this is what I want to do?
Definitely not in the audition. My first audition was absolutely horrific. It was for a musical. It was for Annie, and I don't know if I sang 20% of the notes correctly, but they were desperate for some guys to be in the background. But through that experience of performing, but also getting to know these other actors, the production people, seeing the artisanship that goes into the costuming, the staging, the lighting, the sets. It was absolutely just, I couldn't believe how much all these people were bringing their talents to bear, and I just wanted to be a part of it.
So did you continue to be in plays, or did you do more film also? What was the trajectory after that?
Pretty much all stage work. It started probably about half musicals, half it's called straight plays, non-musicals. And yeah, pretty much exclusively as an actor. And then it was only about maybe 6, 7 years ago that I started doing more on the production side, helping as an assistant director, as a stage manager, part of the crew, and then started producing and directing. And now probably about maybe 3/4 of my time tends to be more on the production side. And I try to be in, maybe one show a year if I can.
I had no idea you still continue to do acting, but I'm from with an acting background, and I remember a lot of the people in my acting school will do plays and films, and then slowly many of them would transition, including myself, behind the camera. And it was just that curiosity, for me at least, it was, well, how editing works, how this is put together, or producing a play, what does it take? What was for you that enticed you to go into being not behind the camera, but behind the scenes and work more on the producing side?
Well, the producing really started with COVID, especially here in Queens. A lot of the smaller theater companies, just like Broadway itself, shut down for all of 2020. And even much, if not all, of 2021 for many groups. And some groups wound up not being able to really come back at all. And so that really started myself and some of my colleagues to say, well, we got to produce something. Something's got to go around here. So it was the late 2021. We did our first independent show just as a bunch of friends, and it went so well that we incorporated that year and became Citygate Productions.
Where was that? Was it in Queens or in the city?
It was. Actually, shout out to my neighborhood hangout, Yerman's Irish Pub in Glendale. Jimmy, the owner there, had a back room, and he let us stage an Irish play called The Weir by Conor McPherson. It's about these local Irish folk who are meet at their Irish pub and tell ghost stories. And so we thought that was a perfect thing to do around the fall. And yeah, we owe a lot to Yerman's and to Jimmy.
So you grew up in Philadelphia, but then how did you end up in Queens? And was it the Queens that, like, a love at first sight? This is it. This is the bar I want to live in. Did you know New York before that?
Kind of, yeah. So believe it or not, I don't make that much money doing theater. But I actually really have built a fun career doing fundraising for academic medical institutions. So I was recruited by Mount Sinai Health System to be a fundraiser for them in 2017. So that's what brought my wife and I to New York. And, we had some friends who were up here, and we kind of had a general lay of the land, but we knew we pretty much didn't want to live in Manhattan. But we thought, maybe Brooklyn, and we looked at a few apartments in Brooklyn, and that didn't feel quite right either. And then we started looking in Queens, and our first apartment was in Flushing at the Skyview Apartments, not far from Citi Field, and now we live in Glendale.
In Flushing, not far from here.
Yeah.
So you mentioned medical research. How these two worlds combine? That's so different. Do you see similarities I'm assuming fundraising, you have to do with theater fundraising.
That was going to be my
That
first
helps.
answer. Is clearly fundraising is a big through line. Well, I mean, I will say one of the other things that I remember an older actor used to say a lot when I first got into it. He would say this to anyone who would listen: is that being in the performing arts, especially local theater, really has a lot of translatable skills. You know, you get more comfortable public speaking, you know, you get more comfortable in your own body, being able to articulate well, to improvise even if necessary, to collaborate as a team. So I think I've taken a lot of lessons from my theater experiences into my professional experiences. And then vice versa, now that I've been doing more producing and directing, you know, a lot of those team leadership skills that we're taught in sort of the corporate world, you know, how to be a good manager, how to be a good supervisor, how to be a good coach, how to be organized, how to communicate well. You know, I find that translates very much into being a leader of a theatrical production.
It's very interesting because it's using sort of the both sides
Yes,
of our
exactly.
brain.
Sort of the left and right side, exactly.
Right. So when we think of creative people, we don't think of, more logical, but I'm the same way. I can do both things.
Right.
And yeah, that's special. But you mentioned, first of all, we interviewed you many, many times, probably four, I would say,
So,
many,
yeah.
many. But you always found these interesting spaces where your performances were. I remember once was in a church, and it was very interesting church. Was it in Ridgewood?
Yep,
Yes,
Ridgewood Presbyterian. They call themselves the Stone Circle Theater.
Yes, and then the theater that you're going to have now,
The Secret
performance,
Theater.
the Secret Theater with Richard Mazda. How do you find the spaces? Do they have to reflect the play? What is the correlation there?
So this really started out of necessity because we knew we wanted to produce really exceptional theater around Queens and needing to find space to do it. Finding space has been our number one challenge, and I mentioned, starting with Yerman's Irish Pub in Glendale. The Moose Lodge in Masbeth hosted us a few times early on. And then even you mentioned Richard Mazda's Secret Theater. He's now on his third location. So even he's had to find new spaces to be a venue. But ideally what we found is, we really like producing in different neighborhoods because we just find that, someone in, Woodside wouldn't necessarily come out to Flushing to see something, or it would be a big challenge to do so. So being able to find different neighborhoods to bring live theater to, and then, as you kind of implied, finding spaces that match the show as much as possible. So the first show we did at Ridgewood Presbyterian, I had seen the space, I kind of, locked it away for future reference. And then a director pitched us wanting to do the classic play 12 Angry Men, but she said, ideally I'd love to be able to have the audience be all around the jury table. And I said, I think I just saw a couple months ago a space that would work great for that. And that's exactly how we set it up. We had, because Ridgewood Presbyterian had gotten rid of their pews, and the pews they had you could kind of clear out of the space. So we just put the jury table right in the middle of the floor of the church, and we set up all of the chairs all around, and it really made it a much richer, more dynamic production.
It was very immersive kind of experience.
Exactly, yeah.
12 Angry Men, it's one of my favorite plays, probably the favorite play. And I took my mom and my son in the church, and we loved it.
Thank you.
It was just so immersive. And I remember I met an elderly woman. I was standing on a line in a CVS, I think. It doesn't matter. But we started talking about theater and performances and art in general. And she said, the problem with older people like me, I can't travel to Manhattan to get entertainment. And so it's great that productions like yours go to different places and pockets in the borough that other, elder people can easily have an access to, or even just busy individuals.
Yep.
Because sometimes I would not travel to Manhattan to see a theater. I would rather go and see something local. And I love the fact that you do that. So how do you choose the directors? And you mentioned now you're directing also. How do you choose the directors for the plays?
So,
How do you choose the place?
yeah, no, great question. So, we very much believe that the best art comes from passion and vision. And so, from our very beginning, we've always asked directors to pitch us their passion projects. In fact, the woman, Kathy Schimenti, who directed 12 Angry Men, I had seen her, a show she had directed. I talked to her after. I said, I'd love for you to pitch us a show. I said, what's your passion project? She said, 12 Angry Men. I said, oh, that's a great one. I said, anything else? She goes, nope, 12 Angry Men. Like, that was singularly what she was driven to bring to life. And so we put out a call, usually around this time of year, asking directors to pitch us their passion projects. And over the years, we've gotten more and more. And only being able to do two really solid, bigger productions a year makes those choices sometimes very difficult. But again, we think about the spaces that we have available to us. We think about the budgets. Certain shows require more special effects or bigger casts or, bigger spaces. So we try to weigh the funds that we have available with what's going to make the show really work. And then timing of everything. We have a lot of these shows we have to apply for the rights. Sometimes we get rejected for the rights. In fact, early on, one of our first shows we were going to do, we got a little ahead of ourselves and even started casting it. And then we got a notice from the license holder that we weren't able to do the show. So we had to switch gears very quickly. So there's a lot of factors. It's like a puzzle that comes together, and we have a board and we talk about it, and we try to be unanimous that we all feel really good about the schedule that we put together. And we also realize that art in general and plays in particular are so subjective. Not everything is for everybody. In fact, within our own board, we look back at all the shows we've done since we've been founded, and someone's favorite show is somebody else's least favorite show, and vice versa. So, but we're very proud of everything we've done so far.
So how did the production company come about? And now you mentioned board of directors.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, you didn't have that idea in the beginning, or did you? What was the idea when you started the production company, and why you had the need to start it?
So like I said, we came out of really just a desire to do something, right? That it was 2021, there was no real local independent theater happening in Queens that we could see. And so we, put up this Irish play, and it went so well that those of us who put that show together said, maybe we should do this more formally. And also the fact that, the play we did, The Weir, this Irish play, it's more adult fare. It's, not a lot of people know of it. It's very intimate. It's a bunch of Irish guys in a pub, so you can imagine the language is a bit salty. And, a lot of the theater companies in Queens, because of space, they're often tied to churches. Because it can be hard to drive audience, they tend to do more family-friendly fare that they know will get an audience. And so that struck us that, wow, there's a real need here to do this kind of theater in Queens. And the only way that we felt like we could do that is to incorporate, become a nonprofit, and really try and get grants, do fundraising, to be able to supplement. And also because we have to rent spaces, and we always we pay our actors what we can. We're really trying to do this as professionally, as high quality as possible.
Walk me through the process of choosing a play, the criteria you mentioned a little bit, but what is that timeline for someone who wants to start a production company or produce theater in Queens, let's say? Like, what is the process?
Well, they should have their head examined. But yeah, so what we do is, like I said, around this time of year, we'll ask directors to start submitting pitches, and we have a form. And so they'll tell us about their vision for the show, their resume of the other shows that they've done. By now, we do have kind of a bench of 6 or 7 directors that we've worked with that we really enjoy, and we know we work well together. So, it's very easy for us to think about them as well in terms of what we want to do in the future and where we want to go. And then in the past, if we get a lot of submissions, we've asked some of our former actors to form a kind of a play reading committee. And so we've asked them to read the plays and score them, not just in terms of did they like the plays or not, but do they think they fit with Citygate's mission? And our mission is that we want to create exceptional live theater across Queens that inspire the heart, challenge the mind, and reflect the amazing diversity of our borough. So, there's a lot of great plays out there that maybe are very fluffy, and those are great too. Those are fun, but we always try to tell stories that challenge the mind, that have some substance to it, that we want people to be walking out and having interesting conversations about what they just saw. So that's part of the criteria. Then we narrow it down to maybe 4 or 5. We submit for the rights to the license holders, because again, some of those we might not get the rights to, so that cuts out a few right there. And then we discuss it as a board, and board members serve as producers. And so we've learned that not only do you want a director who's passionate about the show, but you really want a producer who's passionate about the show. And so oftentimes 1 or 2 board members will step up and say, I want to own this one. This one I feel really good about. And then we wind up with 2 shows, a spring show and a fall show.
So typically you have 2 shows a year.
2 what we call main stage shows. So those are ones where we run 2 weekends. They're usually something that we license, that is a high quality script, that we rent a venue out, that we put some budget into. Ever since we started, though, we've also been evolving what we call a new works program, where we try to focus on Queens-based playwrights, but we get some from Manhattan and Brooklyn too, and we try to give them a platform to develop new work. And so we've done, I guess, about half a dozen new works over the years too. So we'll do, like I said, a main show in the spring and the fall, then usually at least one in the summer, and then maybe one other thing in later fall. That will be just like a play reading or a workshop or a solo piece, or maybe like a minimally staged full production. And it's really an opportunity for these playwrights to see their work embodied by actors for the first time, and to have their words spoken in front of an audience for the first time.
So you said that theater makers need community to survive. How do you collaborate with other spaces or organizations in Queens?
Yeah, so people like Richard Mazda, for example, he runs a venue called the Secret Theater, and he's a terrific partner. I mean, he has one of the few really professionalized performance spaces that groups like ours can utilize. And so just being able to find more opportunities like that, more spaces like that. Even places like the Ridgewood Presbyterian Church, is a great space for certain types of shows, and having to juggle their own needs as well. If they have certain groups coming in, that we have to sort of balance what those calendars look like. There's an amazing organization called Materials for the Arts in Long Island City, and so they're a redistributor of materials, of whether it's fabric or furniture or you name it. They get all sorts of random stuff. And so when a production of some kind, whether it's TV or film, closes down, they'll often donate a lot of the stuff they don't need anymore to Materials for the Arts. So then educators, theater makers, like artists, can come in and for free use some of this stuff. And so that's a tremendous resource. And then we've formed a network with a lot of other theater companies. Rockaway Theater Company is an amazing group on Fort Tilden. There's another company, they've kind of become a bit of a sister company to us, called Headwall Theater. They often do stuff out of Court Square Theater or Secret Theater, and so we try to collaborate in terms of resources and materials and marketing and things of that nature. In fact, you guys did one piece where we were back-to-back productions, and so we were able to cross-promote each other.
Yes, that was a wonderful idea. I'm wondering, now that you're saying that there are a few theater companies, is there a space, a website somewhere where all these theater companies are listed and people can find specifically theater and play events?
The short answer is not really. I mean, I know Long Island has something like that. I know Flushing Town Hall is kind of becoming a bit of a kind of Queens Arts Council for the borough, and so you can find a lot of things on their website. But this was actually one of the needs that we felt as well, and so we, from the very beginning, we created a monthly newsletter where we try to promote all the other high quality theater that we know about in Queens. And so I encourage others to reach out to us, and we're happy to promote your groups.
And me and you talked a little bit about challenges before the show, the marketing, and you also mentioned space. I'm assuming funds are also a challenge. Besides that, what are the main challenges of someone who is producing theater and art in general in Queens?
Yeah, I mean, space and money are the two biggest ones. I know, again, Flushing Town Hall recently did a report on performing arts in Queens, and those were two of the biggest things that they cited. I will say driving audience can be a challenge. I mean, I think it's hard for people, especially if you don't drive, to navigate around Queens. It's not always obvious how to get the word out. The Queens Chronicle has been a great partner to us. They always do a wonderful job promoting local arts performances or programs of all sorts. And I'm always tickled when someone calls the box office, and I will sometimes ask, "Oh, how did you hear about the show?" And they're, "Oh, I read about it in the Queens Chronicle." I'm like, "Oh, thank God."
People still read newspapers.
Yeah,
It's great.
and so, but having those sort of central ways of getting the word out is a big challenge. I will say the one thing that we have in a plentiful amount is talent. Going back to what you were saying about how people sometimes don't want to go into the city to see theater. There's so many theater makers and actors who live in Queens, and to give them an opportunity to make theater in Queens is a benefit to them as well. I mean, a lot of the professional theater makers that we've been partnering with, a lot of them live in Astoria, Long Island City, and other places, and they're very grateful to not have to schlep into Manhattan.
Yes, a few years ago we produced Jazz in Queens, short documentary, 30 minutes documentary on jazz in Queens, and that was one thing we discovered interviewing a lot of the artists, that artists would live here in Queens, but they'll often go and work in Manhattan or in Brooklyn but they cannot afford to live in Brooklyn or Manhattan. Yep. So it's always great to see things happening in Queens, so we don't have to cross a tunnel or a bridge to go and get entertainment. And it will be wonderful more and more artists to keep working in the borough, not just living. So let's talk about your next two productions, because I'm coming and I'm very excited.
Thank you.
So how did that come about? Explain to people, what is the relation with the two plays?
Yes, we're very excited. So very famous, well-known Russian playwright Anton Chekhov wrote a piece called The Seagull, arguably his first major piece in the late 1800s. So it's been constantly readapted and stage versions and film and so on. And so one of our directors, actually, Jordan Charlie Watley, he directed an adaptation for us 2 years ago now, Frankenstein. And he's also served as a production person on several shows. He pitched us this modern kind of deconstruction of The Seagull by a playwright named Aaron Posner. And I don't know if I have to censor my language, but it's Stupid Effing Bird is the title. So again, it's very much the seagull story with those characters, but now placed in a very modern setting. And so we committed to producing that piece, and that goes up in May at the Secret Theater in Long Island City. And then, as I said, we also ask people to submit places where they might develop some original work. And we had this amazing theater maker named Emily Ann Banks, who she's been for years now doing her own types of readaptations of different Chekhov pieces. And so she had reached out to me about a few of these ideas, and I immediately thought, ooh, The Seagull could be interesting, because we're already doing Stupid Bird in May. And I talked to Jordan, and he thought it was a good idea, and that these two pieces could sort of be in conversation with each other. And Emily's version of The Seagull is also very much an adaptation in its own right. Also quite immersive. She's got some audience participation sort of baked in. She has a very specific aesthetic that she's going for, and that's also going to be at the Secret Theater. So that goes up March 19th through the 21st, Thursday, Friday, and then 2 shows on Saturday. And we have a talk back on Saturday with Jordan, our May director, some cross-promotional marketing between the two. And right now, if you buy a ticket to both at the same time, you get $5 off, so $2.50 per show. So we're just excited to have this sort of Chekhov spring, as we're calling it.
I love Chekhov. I'm Eastern European. I'm from Bulgaria. Russian is my second language, so I was raised with Chekhov. That was actually the first play and the only play produced here off Broadway. and no one showed up. I was still in acting school. I was acting in it. And only my teacher came in. He said, just keep doing what you're doing. So that was my experience. So kudos to you that you didn't give up and you're plowing through. Where do you see Citygate in the next 10 years? What is the goal? Do you have a vision?
So we just want to keep doing what we're doing, and if we can, we'd love to just be able to put more money into the shows, a little bit more budget, a little bit more being able to pay the artists more of what their time is worth and their talents are worth. You know, it's always it disappoints us when a director has such an amazing vision and we budget it out and we have to make cuts just because the funding just doesn't make sense for us to, keep in business and, risk not having an audience turn up. I mean, it's always a bit of an act of faith when you put up a show. Sometimes it's a huge hit, and then sometimes you feel like everything you did the exact same, and the audience just doesn't turn up, at least not as strongly as you hoped. So we always have to sort of have risk management. But yeah, I mean, we would love to do more shows in different neighborhoods. I would love to do more stuff in places like Jamaica or Bayside or Flushing. We've more stuff maybe even around Forest Hills. We've kind of been doing more in Astoria the last couple of years. And maybe one day we'll do a musical. A lot of us are fans of musicals, but musicals are also by the sort of definition a lot more expensive. The rights are more expensive. You have to have more production talent, a music director, a choreographer. You have to pay musicians. But one day.
One day at a time. So I always ask guests one question for the final question. If someone wanted to experience Queens the way you do, culture, performances, or something unexpected, besides the coming to see a play, where would you send them?
It's hard to come up with just one answer. I mean, Queens is obviously just so diverse. I guess the two answers that immediately come to mind, they're so different from each other, are Flushing and Astoria. We took our kids to the Moving Image Museum in Astoria recently, and they saw the Jim Henson display and loved that. And we often take them to Flushing for Hot Pot and Chuck E. Cheese. So yeah, I think every neighborhood has its own flavor.
Yes. Thank you so much for being here, and I'm looking forward to the 2 performances.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
That's it for today's show, and I'll see you next time on Around Queens.